Welcome to a new episode of the show, The Genius. Dear viewers, today's episode is titled, The American Civil War. Let's continue the story of this monumental event in American history. Previously, we discussed the Battle of Antietam and how General Robert Edward Lee withdrew from his northern campaign. Everyone expected General McClellan to pursue Lee's retreating army and put an end to the war. However, McClellan, known for his procrastination, delayed action, claiming his forces weren't ready. This reluctance frustrated President Lincoln, who personally visited McClellan to urge him to attack. Lincoln believed the Confederate army was at its weakest and needed to be defeated decisively. Despite all efforts, McClellan refused to act, fueling conspiracy theories that he deliberately delayed to undermine Lincoln's presidency and position himself for the next elections. Others speculated that McClellan sought to portray himself as a man of peace who would negotiate instead of prolonging the war. Either way, Lincoln eventually fired McClellan from his command. Meanwhile, Southern hopes were rising as they believed they could pressure the North into retreating. Lincoln decided to strike a blow to those hopes by addressing the issue of slavery, which he had been avoiding. In September 1862, he issued the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, declaring that as of January 1, 1863, all enslaved people in the United States would be free. This revolutionary decision enraged the South, where Confederate President Jefferson Davis called it the most execrable decree in human history. However, in the North, the proclamation was celebrated as a moral victory. Yet, even as slavery was legally abolished, the war continued to exact a heavy toll, not just from battle but from disease, which claimed more lives than gunfire. As the war progressed, economic hardships and food shortages plagued the South due to Union blockades. Confederate currency lost its value, and the government resorted to seizing crops and enslaved people to work for the military. In the North, the war's unpopularity grew, and Lincoln's decision to draft men aged 20-45 into the army caused riots, especially in cities like New York. One remarkable story from the war is that of Newt Knight, a Confederate soldier who deserted and led a rebellion in Jones County, Mississippi, declaring it a free state, aligned with the Union. His group, including escaped slaves, fought Confederate forces for 3 years, creating a symbol of resistance against both the Confederacy and slavery. The turning point in the war came with Union victories led by General Ulysses S. Grant and General William Tecumseh Sherman. Grant's relentless strategy of constant combat wore down the Confederate forces, while Sherman's infamous March to the Sea devastated the South, destroying infrastructure and freeing enslaved people along the way. In April 1865, after months of Union victories and relentless pressure, Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox Courthouse, effectively ending the war. The terms of surrender were generous. Confederate soldiers were allowed to return home with their horses and personal weapons. Tragically, President Lincoln did not live to see the post-war rebuilding. He was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth on April 14, 1865, just days after Lee's surrender. The Civil War left behind a legacy of destruction, with over 620,000 deaths and countless families grieving. Despite the Union's victory and the abolition of slavery, African Americans faced continued oppression, as promises of full equality remained unfulfilled. Segregation and systemic racism persisted for another century until the Civil Rights Act of 1964. After the Civil War, a new chapter began in American history. Despite the massive loss of life and destruction, there was a remarkable lack of vengeance between the two sides. The Union's approach emphasized reconciliation rather than punishment. Confederate leaders, including Jefferson Davis, faced surprisingly mild consequences. Davis, for instance, was imprisoned for 2 years without trial before being released on bail. Even General Robert E. Lee, the Confederate military leader, swore allegiance to the United States and urged his followers to do the same. He spent his remaining years as president of Washington College, earning respect from many despite his role in defending slavery. However, his legacy remains controversial. Statues of Lee continue to provoke political debates, with some viewing him as a brilliant military strategist and others as a symbol of a dark chapter in American history. The sole execution following the war was that of Captain Henry Wirz, the commander of Andersonville Prison, where thousands of Union prisoners of war suffered and died under inhumane conditions. The prison, designed to hold 10,000 inmates, had swelled to 33,000, leading to mass deaths from starvation and disease. Although the war ended slavery, the freedom granted to African Americans was far from complete. The newly freed population of 4 million faced systemic poverty and discrimination. Most received no compensation, land, or resources, forcing many to remain in their former masters' homes as poorly paid laborers. Promises of equality were largely abandoned in favor of appeasing the South, and racism became institutionalized through segregation laws and economic exploitation. The Civil War's conclusion did not resolve the fundamental racial tensions in America. Instead, these tensions persisted, shaping policies and societal norms for decades. It wasn't until the civil rights movement of the 1960s that African Americans began to secure the rights and opportunities promised to them a century earlier. This dark period of American history serves as a reminder of the price of division and the resilience required to rebuild a nation. The Civil War, with all its horrors and heroism, remains a defining moment in the United States journey, illustrating both the depths of human conflict and the capacity for reconciliation. The Civil War left the United States with scars that would take generations to heal. Entire cities lay in ruins, particularly in the South, where homes, infrastructure, and economies were decimated. Despite this, the focus shifted to rebuilding the nation, a process known as Reconstruction. Reconstruction aimed to integrate the Southern states back into the Union and address the rights of newly freed African Americans. However, the period was fraught with challenges. While some progress was made, such as the establishment of the Freedmen's Bureau to assist former slaves and the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments guaranteeing freedom and voting rights, much of the South resisted these changes. Racial discrimination persisted, evolving into systemic segregation under Jim Crow laws. African Americans continued to face violence, poverty, and disenfranchisement. The promises of Reconstruction gave way to a reality where the North prioritized reconciliation with the South over ensuring full equality for African Americans. Even the military leaders of the Civil War found differing paths post-war. Ulysses S. Grant, the Union's victorious general, became President of the United States, serving 2 terms from 1869 to 1877. However, his presidency was marred by allegations of corruption, overshadowing his legacy as a war hero. In contrast, Confederate leaders like Robert E. Lee lived relatively peaceful lives, often celebrated in the South despite their roles in defending slavery. The war's aftermath also left a cultural legacy. Monuments, literature, and films commemorated the conflict, often glorifying one side or the other. While some statues and memorials celebrated unity and bravery, others perpetuated the myths of the lost cause, portraying the Confederacy in a sympathetic light while downplaying the central issue of slavery. Over time, historians and civil rights activists have worked to confront these narratives, emphasizing the brutal realities of slavery and the true causes of the war. This ongoing debate over memory and history reflects the enduring impact of the Civil War on American identity. Ultimately, the Civil War was a defining moment in the United States, shaping its trajectory as a nation. It demonstrated the fragility of unity, the devastating cost of division, and the enduring struggle for justice and equality. Although the war ended more than 150 years ago, its lessons remain relevant today, serving as a stark reminder of the importance of addressing societal divides before they escalate into conflict. Don't forget to check out the sources if you are on YouTube and subscribe to the channel.